Well, welcome everyone. I'm Ashley Melepe with Redmond Mag, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's event titled Getting Your Group Policy Management in Tune and Ready for Microsoft AGPM End of Life, sponsored by SDM Software. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping details. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please make sure to type those into the Q&A box and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. SDM Software has provided some resources which correspond with today's event, so please take a moment to check those out. They're located to the right of your audience console. Today's webcast is also being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link in your email to rewatch the presentation or share with a colleague. And now, I'm thrilled to announce our speakers for today. We have the pleasure of hearing from Greg Schulz, founder of independent IT analyst firm Server StorageIO, and Danny Ferri, a senior solution architect at SDM Software. So we are in for a great event. And with that, I'll pass the time over to Greg to get us started. Over to you, Greg.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Hello, and welcome everybody to today's discussion. And basically, in case you haven't heard or have forgotten, Microsoft announced the Advanced Group Policy Management, AGPM, will be end of life in April of 2026. That which means that in less than a year to go, it's time to prepare for life after AGPM to modernize your group policy management and speed up your Intune adoption. If yours is like many other environments, you're faced with effectively managing your GPOs along with your Intune profiles across platforms, devices, from edge to core, on-prem to cloud, along with SaaS. So how will you coordinate, orchestrate, and manage your endpoint configuration, your lifecycle across platforms? How will you facilitate unified, timely reporting, compliance management, and audits? How will you clean up and enable a smooth migration from AGPM while supporting Intune and Entra? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. And our agenda is how to prepare for that life after AGPM, modernize your group policy environment with SDM software for a unified management, including Intune and much more. So here's what you're going to take away is how to prepare for AGPM end of life, modernizing your group policy environment, assessment, cleaning, and tuning up your GPOs, the role and importance of change management, both for group policy as well as Intune, along with, we're going to see a technology demonstration of Change Manager for group policy Intune called CMGPI. All right, so with that, let's just get into it. Let's look at the big picture, which is you've got AGPM replacement, you've got group policy object management, but then you also have the Intune for your desktop devices and management. And where that need is, and what we're going to be addressing today is that unified management of your servers, your desktop, your devices, for your group policy objects, your compliance, your audit reporting, insight, again, from on-prem to cloud, hybrid, leveraging that change control, change management from your servers to your different devices. And what we see there is over on the right is being able to look up and down that stack. So in other words, your group policies that are addressing from mobile devices to servers to workstation, but also horizontally across the different platforms. All right, so with that big picture setup, let's just take a quick look at some trends around group policy objects, AGPM, along with Intune. And a couple different things going on here is that setting the stage is that part of making this transition for life after AGPM is that there's 20 plus years of group policies out there, thousands of settings in some environments, which leads up to different complexities. So part of this moving forward is getting your environment in order, improving on the posture and health of your group policy object environment. But that also means part of that modernizing is also hardening your group policy environment. And that gets into addressing the compliance and government requirements of HIPAA, SARBOX, PCI, GDPR, among many other alphabet soup requirements, mandates, and needs. So part of this gets into the security management process. risk detection, audit, reviews, authorizations, incidents responses, but also leveraging change management, change control to be able to track what's being changed and what was changed, who changed it, when, where, and why, but also to facilitate that rollback, to be able to go back in time as part of a data protection strategy, as part of a contingency plan, such that if something happens, you have that ability to roll back whatever that group policy or whatever that Intune change was, so that you can get back to a stable type environment. We're going to dig a little bit more into this as we go and as Danny joins us in the discussion here shortly. But we're also looking at the access control. Are you doing role-based access controls? What do you have for insight, timely insight, audit, reporting for your various needs requirements as part of governance, as well as identity and access management? So again, some environments have the idea that you don't need or have to do much with change control or group policies. Some environments don't see the need and the benefit of investing in group policy management, or at least CXOs or chief management or upper layers of management. They're missing out on the opportunity and the business benefits of having a robust, healthy, modernized group policy object and Intune lifecycle management that gives insights, that provides audit information, status, that is facilitating reviews while also meeting compliance needs. So what that sets up the stage for is getting in tune with your Intune and your group policy management. And what this really means is being able to see and have that insight, that awareness of the overall health of your group policies, of having that hardened group policy management and Intune management, and to be able to facilitate that from a common viewpoint. In other words, having that insight, having that awareness, having that migration assistance from AGPM, having that change control, that change management tracking to meet your compliance and governance requirements. So being able to have that visibility, that insight, that timely awareness of what's going on, what is the health, basically, how are things in your group policy world? All right, so what that does is sets the stage for, let's look a little bit closer around group policy and along with Intune issues in different environments. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities along with being prepared for Microsoft sunsetting AGPM? Well, as I mentioned, Microsoft has announced AGPM will be end of life. So what are you doing to get ready for it? And particularly if you're like most environments, you've got a mix of mobile devices, workstations that are probably under Intune, or maybe you're looking at bringing Intune in or leveraging it more robustly, both from on-prem, maybe in the cloud or hybrid type environments. But what about your servers? What about items? What about entities that don't fall under Intune, that are currently under your group policy objects? How are you going to manage those? How are you going to implement that governance, that compliance requirement? How are you going to facilitate that? And that's where the change control comes into play, is being able to leverage staged changes, such that instead of making the change on the fly in a live environment, that the change is staged, which then sets that ability to roll back, to fall back, to be able to move forward, to work around things. But a couple things in here and that we want to touch on is around the complexity of managing different environments and managing your Intune, managing your group policy options. What are some of the the different benefits and advantages, which is native things like basically happen. There's no control. You don't have that visibility. There is that risk of prone to error. In other words, if you've got a typo, an error, an omission, well, that could have an impact on a running production environment. But there's also that susceptibility to a malware delivery, that something inadvertently gets infected or intentionally somebody, a bad actor attacks. That can be a vehicle for delivering malware, is via that deployment of rolling out what looks like an innocent change, all of a sudden propagates something out into the world. So there's another aspect, which is the learning curve of implementing different changes. But again, it comes back to having that insight, having that awareness. So if we look at this, there are a lot of different attack risks and surfaces, including Active Directory, group policies, whether they're on-prem, Entra in the cloud. And again, as I mentioned, these can also be targets for malware delivery. So the question poses is, does Intune reduce threat risks? Yes, no, not sure. What I'd like to do is bring Danny in and talk a little bit about some of his experiences working with different organizations, and what does he see? Danny, what do you see in terms of, is Intune the magic silver bullet? Does it take care of group policies?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Greg. It's true that Intune does reduce some of the risks that is generally posed with group policies, but there are caveats. So it's true there are there's no sysvol or domain controllers to have to worry about. It is a cloud-only configuration, but the risks still exist. For example, there's admin credential compromise, and this still poses a threat. If an attacker gains access to Intune admin roles, they can deploy malicious configurations or apps. There's, the issue of misconfigured policies, which can still wreak havoc on security postures, and also the compliance, the complexity of a hybrid environment with both, group policies and Intune. Like you kind of mentioned earlier that, servers are not supported in Intune. So they have an expanded attack surface that still require careful management to avoid overlap or conflicts. And,
Yes.
go
ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Go ahead. My bad.
I was just going to say, and while the focus is still on Intune, as Microsoft is encouraging people to move off of group policies, there's still a lot of things that Intune can't do. Like you mentioned, it doesn't apply to servers, and there are literally thousands of settings and group policy preferences that are not yet supported in Intune. We have, for example, customers that are creating PowerShell scripts just to fill the gaps of group policies, group policy preferences. So, there's still gaps, and there are still risks to Intune, despite the encouragement to move toward it.
Yeah, so I mean, that begs the question: is you've got these scripts for taking care of the Intune type environment. You did mention about the cloud versus the on-prem, Danny. There's the other aspect, which is that if you think about it, AGPM today, whatever you're doing or going to do or need to do to support the group policy objects going forward, but also the Intune, I mean, there's also this aspect, this notion of protecting the tools, the mechanisms that are protecting your environment. So in other words, if Intune, if your group policy objects are about protecting your organization, your infrastructure, your data infrastructure, your business, you need to be able to protect those things as well.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, there are people that, there are organizations that still haven't focused on that yet. They're busy trying to protect other things, and often things like group policies and Intune and processes around that kind of get put to the side.
So that's a nice segue for the next section, which let's take a little bit closer at Intune, Danny, in that many environments have mandates to use, or that they're looking into using, or they're already using it in different shapes and forms, and that you've got mixed scenarios. Some are using Intune, some are using something else, some are hybrid, but there is that need for common management. And as you pointed out, there's what Intune can do, there's what Intune is good at doing, but Intune doesn't handle everything per se, especially in a post-AGPM era. So, I mean, there's different things associated, there's the complexity of the mixed management environments, there's the support for the mobile, desktop, and devices, along with servers, whether those servers are on-prem or out at the edge, or if they're in one of the many different clouds, Azure, or maybe a Windows server on AWS. But there's all those different things that, again, it ties back to that complexity, the chance for errors and omissions, mistakes to happen. So that's that need for that timely insight, that timely visibility of what is that health, what is that posture, how are things going, where are there gaps in coverage, where are there gaps in the different protection mechanisms, but also how are those protection mechanisms being protected themselves? If you're reliant just on scripts, well, are those scripts protected? How are they maintained? Are those scripts themselves under change control, change management? So in other words, there's cost savings, the benefit to the business by streamlining, by modernizing, by optimizing, and removing that complexity. You remove complexity, you generally remove costs. Some thoughts there, Danny?
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. And the other complexity is added complexity is that for many organizations, as much as Microsoft would love to move off of Active Directory and group policies, the thing is, and the reality is for many organizations, they're still going to have Active Directory. And so as a result, group policies are not necessarily going to go away. So that really, that really highlights the fact that they're going to be in a hybrid environment for a very long time. And so that adds to that complexity and the need to be able to have controls over both environments.
So as a part of that, Danny, then is part of modernizing your group policy environment, modernizing Intune, is the notion of locking down group policy options and Intune profiles, putting change control around those, as well as delegating access based on a tiering model. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so natively, it's very difficult to do that. So Intune does do a good job at trying to lock things down. So it does have some mechanisms for doing that. But natively, there's still gaps around that, and with group policies, on-prem group policies, a lot of people you can lock that down through just the normal, SACLs that you would do in Active Directory users and computers. But the issue is that, as your environment grows, and now we're adding the complexity of adding another environment, Intune environment, then that becomes very difficult to have oversight over and control. So it's hard to control the access and cleanup efforts toward group policies as well as Intune, because now we're adding something else that you have to take care of, right? And so that's why, as I mentioned earlier, the need to have a unified mechanism to be able to have the same processes that you would have on one apply to both. And so you're not learning something different for Intune, you have a process that works on both environments.
Danny, that's an interesting notion, is that rather than saying, here's what we're going to have for policies for group policy, and here's what we're going to have for policies for Intune, is having essentially, for lack of a better phrase, a generic or a policy that then gets implemented, deployed through group policy, that gets implemented, deployed through Intune, but that you've got that common management, that unified management, that's more than just a visibility monitoring dashboard. It's that mechanism that, here is my policy, now I need to push it out through group policy, I need to push it out through Intune. Is that the thinking?
Yeah, exactly. And, and as you mentioned here about having change control, but you also need something that, like a central mechanism to be able to not only have your change control, your check-in, check-outs, the approvers, editors, where you can put, RBAC roles in them, but also where you can see who's done what, when, and where. You have some version control around them. So, although we're locking things down, you can see what was done in history. And so all of those are important. And also, you mentioned here on your slide here about audits and backup. Intune natively doesn't give you the ability to back up and roll back Intune profiles. So, having that as well as part of your unified mechanism and process for both GPOs and Intune is very important.
So let's talk an applied situation, maybe a little bit of a curveball, but we've talked about AGPM sunsetting, but we also routinely hear about Windows 10 and that migration over to Windows 11. And in your different conversations with different organizations, that as an example of getting prepared, where it might be some GPOs, it might be some Intune or some combination. Where does something like using this unified view fit in to help organizations prepare and finally get moving to Windows 11 in your experiences?
Sorry, kind of breaking up there a bit. I don't know if it was on my side, so I hope I can answer the question. Yeah, so being able to have these products that allow you to have this unified view, you can easily look at the settings that you have. For example, if you're going to be merging some of the settings from Group Policies to Intune, and you're in that transition period with a lot of these products, and especially that's the case for SDM products, you'll have the ability to look at the settings that are applied on GPOs as well as, and then compare them with the settings that you might need to do with Intune profiles, right? And so by doing that, you can see how that migration is going to be effective.
Great. Let's transition into, we've talked about Intune, we've talked about group policy, we've talked about AGPM, we've talked about unified management, and let's drill down a little bit into what are some different considerations for group policy and Intune endpoint unified management. So in other words, how will you migrate off AGPM for group policy management, i.e. migration tools? What are you going to have that provides you that insight, that awareness, that situational awareness, notification, reporting, monitoring, including out-of-band changes and rollback? How about things like granular delegation, being able to restrict settings to enable more control? To support for compliance and governance framework mapping, along with modernizing your Intune and your GP management. Again, a lot of that is that insight. What do you have? That assessment, what needs to be changed? How do you improve your posture? How do you improve your health? What needs to be done? Having tools that help you do that assessment, but also to say, here's what else you need to do. And that sets up for that, enabling that holistic change control, from the desktop, files, folders, servers, devices. And again, with Windows 11, the mandates coming up along with that. Danny, what are some of the things that you're running into, and what are the things that people should consider when looking at endpoint unified management?
Yeah, so you mentioned that holistic change control management on desktop file servers and so forth. And we kind of mentioned this earlier, many organizations already have that concept around governance when it comes to files, folders, etc. But they often miss the requirements and the benefits of having governance on their policies, group policies, as well as Intune profiles. So these are really important, right? It's essential to their organization, this policy store. And so many don't have, or they don't even see the need for governance around them. So understanding that, when you're looking at this holistic change control management on the rest of your organization, you want to make sure that you include group policies and Intune profiles in that discussion.
Great, Danny. And then, there's also the protection around the group policy options into, part of, again, this unified management is more than just that monitoring. It's that being able to actually do things to invoke make the change, but have it applied via that change management. What are some thoughts, perspectives there?
Yeah, like earlier we spoke about the risks to both GPOs and Intune environments. So some of the things that we can do to mitigate the risks. So if we're talking about group policies, we can limit the GPO delegations and only add trusted admins, do proper auditing on sysvol and GPO changes, look into a proper GPO management software for change tracking and auditing, and then remove some legacy startup logon scripts where possible. For Intune, we want to use RBAC roles for access for admins. You want to try to enable MFA for all Intune roles, and also monitor policy changes using that change management software that we talked about that would allow you to audit and provide proper lifecycle management of the policies and profiles. And then, there's that final thing of regularly reviewing the deployments and the scripts of Intune, because as we mentioned, a lot of people are starting to do adding scripts in Intune to be able to fill the gaps that Intune doesn't provide.
Yeah, that's fantastic perspectives there, Danny. As a part of that, so we keep talking about unified management, and yet we've got these different pockets, these different focus areas. Using unified management, does that mean that everybody who's doing Intune now has to become a group policy, or anybody who's doing GPOs now needs to Intune? Can they be handled like we basically have a common team that cross learns? Or if it's for organizational reasons, that there's the Intune team and there's the GPO team? What are you seeing out there in the real world?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. So a lot of people that we speak to, they now have, one time it was the desktop team and then the server team, and they could, or it was one team that handled both. But now what's happening is as folks are moving to Intune, there's still the need to manage group policies. And so you have these two departments that are doing things differently. And so without that unified process that a good change management software product would provide, then you could have different processes, and then that adds to different risks, right? Like different levels of risk, right? So you might have a level of risk in Intune because the process is handled differently, as opposed to a level of risk that you have with GPOs because the process is handled differently. And so that's, once again, that's why it's so important to be able to have proper change management software that allows you to handle both in a unified way.
Outstanding. Great perspectives there, Danny. So with that, we've talked about the need, we've talked about challenges, issues, opportunities, and unified management. Now is actually a very good time to take a look at the technology and get a demo. So Danny, if you've got everything fired up, ready to go, let's do the demo.
Thanks, Greg, for laying that groundwork on the critical role change management plays in both Group Policy and Intune profiles. Now, I'd like to share how SDM Software can help organizations in achieving effective and reliable change management when it comes to GPOs and Intune profiles. Change Manager for Group Policy and Intune profiles provides a modern approach for ensuring that only approved changes happen within your Group Policy and Intune environments. It provides a strong defense against unwanted or unexpected changes compromising environmental security. And it does give you a single console for on-prem hybrid environments as well as Intune profile management. And we also added a built-in utility to migrate history and backups from AGPM to CMGPI. When you first log into the web UI, you're presented with a dashboard. Here you can quickly identify the status of your GPO management environment. Change Manager helps strengthen the security and governance by letting administrators assign specific roles such as product administrator,
break glass, GPO creator, auditor, and approver. And in version 1.9, we've added the ability to optionally enable the deployer role for a third level of review to provide even greater oversight and control. Some roles are assigned globally, and other roles, such as approver and editor roles, as well as deployer roles, are assigned on a per-object basis for GPOs, Intune profiles, AD containers, as well as administrative containers. The new restricted settings feature gives you precise control over which policy areas within a GPO can be edited by a GPO editor. For example, you can prevent an editor from changing security settings in a GPO while still allowing them to configure other policy areas, ensuring greater control and protection over sensitive configuration. CMGPI also keeps track of all changes done within the product, as seen in the menu option entitled Audit Log. The Settings menu allows you to configure default approvers, require comments at object check-in, and also be able to enforce naming conventions using regular expressions. So, for example, if I enable a specific expression here, I can verify that it works, save it, and now that is my new GPO naming rule. Under the Alerting Settings tab, you can configure a default email or distribution list for system alerts. You can also configure a Teams connection setting so that you can be notified via Teams on different actions, approve, check-in, check-out, and so forth. Now let's log in as an editor. As an editor, you have a set of objects associated with you. You can check out, edit, and perform change control operations on these objects without affecting the production version. You can view differences between current and prior versions, history of changes, and more. Another key difference between AGPM and Change Manager is that Change Manager allows you to manage containers, such as organizational units. You can link additional GPOs, enable or delete links, and control block inheritance. You can also roll back a change. So in this case, I have deleted a GPO and I want to go back to the previous version. So I'm going to roll back the change, approve the change, and deploy the change. Now I wanted to show you how the same change control process applies to Intune profiles. You can edit settings, assignments, and scope tags. You're alerted of out-of-band changes with Intune. You can also roll back unwanted changes to Intune profiles, something that's not available natively with Intune. So if we wanted to make a change to, let's say, this Intune profile, we'll check out the profile, edit the settings. It takes you to the admin center. And here you can make a change. I'm going to enable Windows Health Monitoring, review, save. Once done, simply close the window, check in, enter the ticket number. We can see we're already alerted that there was a check-in and it's waiting for approval. I'm just going to simply approve this and then deploy the change. You also have the option to schedule the deployment to a different date as well. And the deployment is done. Now, CMGPI comes with an awesome feature called Global Settings Search. Basically, it allows you to search for a path or a value that can be located within any GPO or Intune profile. So if I want to look for something with the word password in it, it will go and search the environment and it'll tell you which GPOs contain that, that term, password. You can then select the one that you want and you can simply select more details. It will take you to that GPO, and you can either make changes to it or review the more settings. And it's the same thing with Intune profiles. You can select, I'm going to use the same password, and it finds the Intune profile that contains the term password in either the path or the value. So let's now briefly walk through what an AGPM import would look like. We've provided a command line utility called maintenance tool that we'll use for importing AGPM GPO history and backups into Change Manager for Group Policy and Intune. So I have the syntax here. I'm going to simply just press enter. It's going to look at the archive for AGPM, import it, and restart the CMGPI service. And so it looks like it started. Now we can log into CMGPI and take a look at what was imported. Okay, so let's look at to see which GPOs exist in AGPM. And so I go to my change control in AGPM, and you can see that there's a list of different GPOs. I'm going to focus on this one here, Cuprum AD AGPM controlled GPO. And let's take a look at the version difference here. So we can see the change that was done. First of all, if we go into the audit log, we can see here that this check-in was done by AGPM, checked in, and the comment was updated security policy, and that was the version 2.8. And that was done in AGPM. So now if I go to my objects and I go to that GPO, which is the Cuprum AGPM controlled GPO. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this out, and I'm going to make a change. And then what I'll do is I'll roll back the change to the AGPM version that was checked in. So let's just make a change here. We'll edit. I'm going to make a change to the account lockout policy here that we made in AGPM. So I'm going to just not define this, and because it really shouldn't be in this GPO. So now I've removed it, and now I go back to the group policy, and I can check it in. And what I'll do is I'll put my ticket number. I will approve this change. And now I'll deploy the change, and I'll deploy immediately. So now if we go back into, if we go to GPMC and take a look at the settings natively, so we can see here security settings, account policies, account lockout policy, and it's not defined. So that change was undone from what was done in AGPM. And so we see that it's actually been done into production. So now let's say I wanted to roll back the version of this GPO back to the AGPM version. So we removed the account lockout policy. So let's go back to version 2.0, which would be the AGPM version. Now we're going to submit it. We will now approve the request, and we'll now deploy the change to production. So now if we go back into GPMC, we want to take a look at this natively, we can take a look at the same GPO. We'll edit it to take a look at the policy to make sure it was rolled back correctly. So go to security settings, account policy, and lockout policy, and you can see that the restore of the backup that AGPM created has been completed successfully. And so now this has been rolled back to the version that was in AGPM.
So we've highlighted just a few features that can be found in Change Manager for Group Policy and Intune. There's so many more features that are available. I've listed just a few here. Support for SSO using Entra ID users and groups. We have a powerful PowerShell interface, which includes about 85 plus commandlets within the module. We have the ability to assign GPOs, containers, and Intune profiles to an administrative container to create a virtual container for delegation aligned to business or operational needs. And we also have the ability to restore deleted GPOs. We've added support for installation on Windows Server 2025. Change Manager also supports SQL Server or Azure SQL. And as you noticed in our demo, we have the ability to define the severity and of a change ticket number in the check-in dialog. And then finally, Change Manager does come with high availability, so you can deploy Change Manager in a highly available environment. Thanks for letting me show you CMGPI. Greg, I'm going to pass this back to you now.
Hey, great. Thanks, Danny. And we got some great resources here as well to build on, follow up from that good demo, the view of the technology. You want to just talk us through some of these resources and additional information?
Yeah, for sure. So, if you click on that first link, that will give you allow you to download a free trial of Change Manager. The install is pretty easy. If you want to do it on your own, or you can reach out to SDM Software and we can help you with that. Also, there's the data sheet for Change Manager. I did put a link there for the facts on governance, and that's a real interesting one because it does go into explaining why there is a need for policy governance in general, and it highlights how a couple of SDM Software products, Change Manager as well as GPAA, does provide that holistic governance toward your group policy environment. And then also we have an awesome link to the blog, and there's constant content being updated there. So, check all these resources out, and please feel free to send us questions if you have any. We'd be happy to answer them.
Outstanding. Fantastic, Danny. Thanks. So, hey, it's time for some Q&A, and we've got questions queued up here. So, Danny, if you're ready for some Q&A, let's get to it.
Let's get to it.
Okay. So, Wolfgang asks, what about managing MEMCM baselines and configuration items?
Yeah, so CMGPI does support the configuration as well as scripts within Intune. Right now, we're working on also adding other features as well.
Great. We got another one here pertaining to CMGPI. Does CMGPI update the comments field of the GPO for quick identification of versioning within GPMC?
That's a good question. The comments portion and the versioning is actually done within Change Manager, and we house that in our backend database. So we don't really do much updates with the native fields, but yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea to do that.
Okay, so here we've got a little bit longer one from Raymond. Challenges I've had: a GPO, but nothing in Intune, or vice versa. Like you mentioned, no control in Intune, but it is used with GPO, but the user doesn't connect to a DC. One thing about GPO too is that it's enforceable, but if the rule doesn't exist in Intune, the user can modify the policy and change it. What's been done to solve this, or what's the solution for that?
Yeah, there's really no easy answer here yet. In some respects, Microsoft is still learning from all the mistakes that they made 25 years ago in group policies. So don't really have an answer on that one.
Okay, fair enough. So we got another one, if you're ready, Danny, is can I view the differences in settings between the different versions of GPOs, container and Intune profiles?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. You can do that with Change Manager. So I think if you've seen it if you saw it in the demo, I did kind of show the different versions, and if you click, you can click which versions you want to compare, and it'll show you the differences. It'll show you actually the differences in settings.
Great, great. All right, another one here is. Do you support SSO/MFA in Change Manager?
Yes, we do. And it not only allows you to sign in with Entra ID account, but you can also delegate access to the Entra ID account. So we do support SSO as well as Microsoft MFA, especially with Azure enabling it by default now.
Got it. And if you're ready for another one, we've got them queued up here, Danny, here's one from Holly. We use a third-party extension that adds nodes to the native GPO interface. I'm assuming this would still work as expected by just installing the CSE on the new SGM server?
For Holly, let me just see. I don't really see where it is. I'm trying to see there.
Oh, no worries.
I see it.
I can, you got it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
just so you know, we can support third-party extensions as long as they integrate into the existing group policy infrastructure. What that means is that you can back up the third-party extension settings data using GPMC backup, and that also renders in a settings report. So as an example, we've done testing with the Netrix Policy Pack software, the extensions that they provide, and we do integrate well with that. So that's an example of a third party that plays well with our change control. I don't know universally that all of them do, but that is something that we've tested explicitly, and we'd be happy to work with you if you have a third party extension that's something that we're not familiar with.
Great. And I should mention that mystery voice that just jumped in and help with the questions. We have Darren with us today from SDM. Darren, you just want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah. I'm Darren Marley. I'm one of the founders of SDM. So good
Great.
to be here.
Glad you could join us for the Q&A. Appreciate that. All right, so let's keep moving through these questions here. We got another one here, and I'll make this a jump ball. Danny or Darren, take your choice here. Can you say more about how many levels of approval the product supports?
Yeah, so we actually have 3 different levels of review. So we have, we have an approver, you have the editor, and then we also have a deployer. So all 3 would act as, a reviewer / approver when they're doing their portion of it.
Outstanding. Darren, you want to add anything to that?
Good.
Okay, no worries. Can you talk a little bit more about how the APGM migration works?
Yeah, so you would have your GPOs in AGPM, and then we would also take control of the GPOs within CMGPI. And then, as you probably already saw in the demo, I showed the utility that we use. And what that utility does is it will go and look at the archive for AGPM, and it will bring all that information in, not only the history and the versioning, but it'll also bring in the restore, like the backups. So that way you can restore from an earlier backup that AGPM did. And I kind of showed that. I know it's really quick in the demo, but I kind of showed how that worked in the demo.
All right. We got another question here about deployment, which is, do you have a full package with requisites? In other words, to be able to install into an infrastructure without the internet?
I don't see that question. Hold on for a second.
Oops, no worries.
Yes, the answer is yes. We don't require internet connectivity, assuming you're not using Intune support. We don't require internet connectivity to install the product. You can just install it in an air-gapped environment just fine. As long as we have access to AD, we're good.
And does that mean you could also work in a multi-domain?
Yeah, absolutely. We support, as long as those domains are trusted in some way, at least a one-way trust to the domain / forest that the management server is in, we're good. We are working on actually adding support for untrusted domains. That will be later this year.
Interesting. So does that also tie into, your traditional AD domains as well as Entra?
Today, we support just a single Entra tenant for a given management server. Obviously, you can spin up another management server for a different Entra tenant, but we are looking at adding multi-tenant support to Entra as well. It's a less common scenario, but it's definitely something we've heard from folks about.
Got it. And there is a question out there from Holly. Will there be access to this recording from the webinar? Yes, this webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to come back and listen to it in more detail as you like. All right, so we got another question here. How does licensing work, i.e. per application user, per GPO, per total count of users in AD, enterprise, or something else?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. So it's per active computer account in either AD or Entra. So it depends on which one you're using.
Okay. And there's a follow-up question about support for GMSA.
Yes, we do support GMSA on CMGPI and also our other product called GPA, Group Policy Auditing and Attestation.
Got it. Good. Thank you. All right, so looking through, I think we're working through the list pretty good here. And got a question more about the hybrid environment. Touched on it, Danny, in your demo. Darren, you've touched on it as well. But for those doing a migration, particularly hybrid, where there's that mix of Intune and the GPOs with GPMA replacement, but also hybrid from on-prem as well as cloud. How does that migration work, and what are some of the tools, or expand on some of the tools that you have that help with the assessment, the planning, as well as the actual migration?
Yeah, so we've talked mostly about our change control solution today, but we have a bunch of other solutions related to group policy, and we have a product called the Reporting Pack, which has been around for a while, that sort of helps you assess group policy from the perspective of trying to optimize it and improve upon it, and find duplicates and conflicts, and basically optimize what you have today. We have a product that works with that called GPO Migrator, and GPO Migrator has been about the ability to migrate settings from one GPO to another. That is being expanded and probably be out within the next couple of weeks, that we'll be able to now migrate settings from group policy to Intune profiles. So you'll be able to directly take specific settings within specific group policy objects and essentially move them into Intune. Obviously, we will only support settings that Intune can handle. If you're familiar with the GPO analytics tool that Microsoft provides, it kind of does a wholesale absorption of a GPO and tries to put it into an Intune profile. This will allow you to do that on a more granular basis, where you can pick settings across multiple GPOs, and we'll tell you if they're compatible, and we will migrate them if we can.
Great, thanks, Darren. So got a reminder to the audience, we do have time for a few more minutes for some additional questions, and before we wrap up. But the question we have here is tied to working with Microsoft. What is your integration? What is your involvement relationship with Microsoft? Either Danny or Darren.
I mean, we don't have any specific relationship with Microsoft. We try to provide solutions that help customers using their technology, but that's really about it. Yeah.
So more of a coexistence in the ecosystem.
Yeah. Microsoft is a giant lumbering organization, and we try to be nimbly working to make them better.
Great, good comment. So another question we have here, and then we'll start to wrap up, is, all right, this all sounds great. This all sounds good. We're ready to go. How do we convince management to go ahead and justify and do this?
I can talk about that. So once again, is really understanding the requirements that a company has, a corporation has in their environment, right? Upper management, they're dollars and cents when it comes to IT. How much does it cost? And can we afford it? Next is, does it satisfy audit? Because if we get an audit item, then we're going to be spending a lot of money. So just helping our executives understand, first of all, what the cost would be, but also more importantly, the benefits around it, as well as how it would preemptively address a lot of the audit items that would be coming down. So having, for example, a product like Change Manager, which does satisfy a lot of the audit items that customers do encounter, a lot of audit questions that they do encounter. So having that already there, it'll be easy to be able to answer those audit items, and and then pass your yearly audit. So helping them understand the benefits around it, and also helping them to understand how Change Manager or management's software can help reduce risks around the different policies in the environment.
Great, thanks. So with that, we've got to start wrapping up here. And I guess at this point, any closing comments, suggestions, tips, recommendations from Danny or Darren to our audience before we wrap up?
I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. We're really excited about the different changes that we're doing in Change Manager. We see our customers loving the product and also what it can do. So I encourage everybody to check out our website, check out the different resources that we've provided, and feel free to reach out to us anytime if you have any questions.
Great. Danny, any closing comments?
No, yeah, thanks to everyone for attending.
Outstanding. All right. Well, this is Greg Schulz saying thanks to Danny and Darren from SDM, as well as all of our attendees for today. And a reminder, this is being recorded. And with that, let's hand back to Ashley for final wrap-up and housekeeping.
Thank you, Greg. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Greg and Danny, as well as Darren. That was an excellent presentation. Folks, it looks like we are out of time for today. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have a new one, please feel free to enter it in the console now, and we'll make sure it gets passed along to the SDM Software team. A big thank you again to Greg and Danny, as well as Darren, for joining us. To you, our audience, for attending today's webcast, and of course to SDM Software for sponsoring this event, brought to you by Redmond Mac. Thanks again for being with us, and have a great rest of your day.